From mystery and greed to gambling, scandal, and prison time, these are 8 golfers who damaged their own reputation, not because their game disappeared, but because of what they did off the course. And first, we start with number 8. Number 8, Anthony Kim. He is the least clear-cut name on this list, and that's exactly why we're starting with him. Because Anthony Kim didn't ruin his reputation with one massive scandal the way some of the others did, his reputation faded into something stranger. It became a story built on rumors, silence, and one of the weirdest disappearances modern golf has ever seen. At one point, Kim looked like a future superstar. He was flashy, talented, fearless, and for a while, he felt like one of the most exciting young players in the sport. Then he vanished. The injuries piled up, the comeback never came, and over time, people stopped asking what happened to Anthony Kim and started filling in the blanks themselves. That's where the damage really happened. Because once the reports about the disability insurance payout started floating around, the public version of Anthony Kim changed. He stopped being the young phenom who got hurt. Instead, he became, in a lot of people's eyes, the guy who took the money and disappeared. And Kim knows that. He said it himself in 2024, admitting that public perception was that he took this money and ran. That quote from him tells you this wasn't just gossip. He knew exactly what people thought of him. Now, to be fair to him, he also said that version wasn't true, and that his years away from golf were filled with surgeries, addiction issues, and real personal struggles. So this is not the most scandalous entry on the list, but it is one of the most unusual examples of a golfer's reputation being buried under mystery. And from here, the stories get a lot less ambiguous. Number 7, Stephen Bowditch. With Bowditch, the issue wasn't a mystery. It was a public low point that was impossible to explain away. He was a 2-time PGA Tour winner, a President's Cup pick, and for a while, he looked like one of those players who had fought through enough pain to earn real respect in the sport. That is what made what happened in 2017 feel so damaging. That year, during Phoenix Open week, Bowditch was arrested for drunk driving in Arizona. Police said his truck had been swerving, then sitting through green lights, and officers found him asleep inside with the engine running. His reported blood alcohol level was over 0.2, which made this feel like far more than a bad decision on a rough night. And that's why this hit his reputation so hard. Overnight, people started viewing him as someone in serious personal trouble. This wasn't just a weird tabloid story, not harmless chaos. This was a DUI arrest serious enough to completely change the conversation around him. Bowditch is not higher on this list because this was more tragic than villainous. But reputationally, the damage was real. And that brings us to a golfer whose image cracked in one of the most embarrassing ways possible. Number 6, Tommy Gainey. Tommy Gainey had one of those sports nicknames people instantly remember. 2 gloves, blue collar. He was quirky, easy to root for. Then, in 2019, that image took a direct hit. Gainey was arrested in Florida as part of a prostitution sting. Reuters later reported that he received 11 months probation after a misdemeanor solicitation charge, and Associated Press coverage said he was one of 124 people arrested in the operation. That alone was enough to permanently stain the reputation of a player who had never really been known for scandal before. And that's what makes this one so brutal. It wasn't just that Tommy Gainey got arrested, it was the contrast. The public version of him had always felt pretty simple, just a regular guy who happened to be really good at golf. So when that headline landed, it shattered that image almost instantly. There was no complex moral debate here, no split public opinion. It was just one of those stories that makes people look at a familiar sports figure and think, well, that changed everything. Now, speaking of players whose public image became almost inseparable from self-destruction, the next name is far bigger. Number 5, John Daly. John Daly is one of the strangest cases in golf history because he damaged his reputation over and over again and somehow still stayed weirdly beloved. Most players get into one scandal that follows them forever, but with Daly, it looked like he turned chaos into a whole second career. Alcohol problems, gambling stories, suspensions, jail incidents, wrecked relationships, public meltdowns. You could argue that for long stretches of his life, the golf almost became secondary to the circus around him. Daly even faced a 6-month PGA Tour suspension after conduct that brought the tour into disrepute, including a night in jail to sober up, and Daly himself admitted he had wasted a lot of years. Because John Daly's reputation eroded through repetition, one incident became another, then another, until his recklessness stopped feeling surprising. He became the golfer people expected to spiral. And once that becomes your brand, that is reputational damage, even if fans still find you entertaining. That is the key with Daly. He never fully lost public affection, but he absolutely lost credibility. Number 4. Matt Kuchar. Matt Kuchar did not get arrested. He did not blow up his marriage in public or disappear for a decade. What he did was, he paid a fill-in caddy $5,000 after winning nearly $1.3 million, and somehow that was enough to crack his whole image. That is not an exaggeration either. After winning the Mayakoba event in Mexico, Kuchar paid substitute caddy David Ortiz $5,000. On paper, maybe that sounded defendable to him. In public, it looked awful. The backlash grew fast, especially after Kuchar said that for a guy who makes $200 a day, a $5,000 week is a really big week. Later, Kuchar admitted he had been stubborn and hard-headed. Now, to be fair, David Ortiz was a local fill-in caddy, not Kuchar's regular tour caddy, so nobody necessarily expected the full 10%. But in PGA Tour culture, a winning caddy usually gets around 10%, which would have been roughly $129,000 here. So when Ortiz got only $5,000, the gap felt huge, and that's why the story exploded. This was never just about the number either, it was about the mask slipping. Kuchar had spent years looking like one of the safest, easiest guys to like on tour. Then one dispute over money made a lot of fans rethink all of it. Suddenly he looked cheap, and tone-deaf enough not to understand why people were upset in the first place. Now, number 3, Phil Mickelson. For most of his career, Phil Mickelson had one of the most flexible reputations in golf. He was the gambler, but in a fun way, the risk-taker. The guy who took crazy shots, smiled through the pressure, and somehow made all of it feel charming. Then over time, that image started darkening. The first layer was money. More specifically, the feeling that money and risk were not just part of Phil's personality, but increasingly part of the problem. In 2023, after more reporting around his gambling became public, Mickelson admitted his betting had become reckless and embarrassing. And once that line is out there, people start looking at you differently. That is where his reputation really started shifting, because fans were no longer just watching a golfer with flair. They were watching a man who seemed increasingly driven by compulsion, leverage, and money. Then LIV happened, and that's when the damage to Phil's reputation became impossible to ignore. Phil's comments about the Saudi-backed league made things worse because they exposed both sides of the problem at once. On one hand, he attacked the PGA Tour and called its behavior obnoxious greed. On the other hand, he openly acknowledged how dangerous and controversial the Saudis were, but that he was willing to use them to create pressure on the PGA. So to a lot of people, he came across as someone who understood exactly what he was getting into and did it anyway. When the backlash hit, Phil called his own comments reckless. But by that point, the image had already changed. The talent was still there, the trophies were still there. But for many fans, the charm did not feel the same anymore. And from there, we get to a golfer whose public image was even bigger, which made the fall hit even harder. Number 2, Tiger Woods. Let's preface by saying that Tiger Woods is still one of the greatest golfers who ever lived. Nothing about this list changes that. His legacy as a player is secure. His impact on the sport is permanent. But that is not the same thing as saying his reputation came through untouched, because it absolutely did not. What made Tiger's fall so massive was the version of Tiger people thought they knew before 2009. He was not just dominant. He looked controlled, disciplined, unshakable, almost engineered. Then, after the car crash outside his home, the whole image cracked open. Woods released a statement apologizing for what he called his transgressions, later admitted he had let his family down, and stepped away from golf as the scandal exploded around him. Reports also documented the sponsor fallouts that followed, which showed how much damage had been done. And here is the real point. Tiger did not ruin his greatness. He ruined the ceiling of his public image. Because if none of that had happened, Tiger would still be Tiger Woods, but the aura around him might be even higher than it already is. He might be remembered not just as one of the greatest athletes ever, but as one of the rare few whose image never really cracked. Instead, it did crack, spectacularly. And even though he rebuilt a lot of public goodwill over time, that earlier version of Tiger, the almost untouchable version, never fully came back. Which brings us to number 1. Number 1. Ángel Cabrera. Ángel Cabrera is number 1 because with him, this stopped being a reputation story and became a moral one. A lot of golfers on this list embarrassed themselves. Some looked greedy, some looked reckless. Some blew up the image people had of them. Cabrera went far beyond that. Cabrera returned to the Masters in 2025 after serving a 30-month prison sentence for domestic abuse. Reports also confirmed that he had been extradited from Brazil to Argentina over domestic violence allegations, and later coverage detailed convictions related to threats, harassment, and abuse involving former partners. That is why he has to be number 1. Because once a golfer's story includes prison time for abusing women, the discussion changes completely. This is no longer about whether fans still like him, or whether the media was too hard on him, or whether he can rehabilitate his public image with a few good interviews. The damage is deeper than that. For most people, those facts become the first thing attached to his name, and deservedly so. That is what separates Cabrera from the rest of this list. And that is why he is number 1.